this Sunday we get to have Easter in June. Are you excited about this? Easter in June. And listen, I mean, the pressure on the preacher on a real Easter, I mean, we got brunches, we got parties. No pressure, right? Just take your time, Dave. No, we'll move quick, but we always do. We always move quick. But Easter in June, so maybe even having not the holiday and all the accoutrement attached to this Easter story, because we're right in the Gospel of John, we'll get to see the resurrection account here, just like we would on an Easter Sunday, but without all the distractions. So maybe we see it in a new way. That's sort of my hope. Maybe a new aspect of it comes to life for you, and you can see it fresh, and you experience life. Now, I just feel like it's falling on again, we don't plan that far out, so this wasn't intentional. We also didn't know that we'd been moving. I mean, up until about a month ago, I still had great hopes that we'd be able to stay here. So it's all happening kind of fast, but isn't it kind of interesting? Like, this is Easter in a lot of ways for Sedaris, so it's good that we're hitting this passage of Scripture. It's Easter in a lot of ways. One building that we've loved and used and it's been amazing is going to be sort of taken to the grave, right? Like, that's literally what's going to happen. It's going to be taken to the grave. But then, Resurrection Life, a whole new building, is coming to life for us in a new way. So it's very resurrection. You hear that? You feel that? It feels very gospel, this whole thing. I shared this a couple weeks ago. This option was going to be full of debt and servitude to a mortgage for really the rest of my life. And then, and I would have to put my name on it. And so anyhow, now this other thing is debt-free. See the gospel story? So it's kind of a great Easter in June in a lot of ways. Then we've got these, potentially 10 individuals who are wanting to declare resurrection life for themselves, that God has taken hold of them and has united with them, that they've been buried with Christ in baptism and raised with Christ to walk in newness of life. I mean, we get to celebrate that in June. So it's sort of the Easter in June for a number of reasons. And one of them is we get to actually study for the next couple weeks the resurrection and the resurrection account. So I'm super excited about that. What perfect timing. You'd almost think we planned, but I can assure you we do not. We do not. We are a semi-organized religion here at Sedaris. Semi-organized. We don't like organized religion. Semi-organized. Okay. So, speaking of the resurrection, and all the ways that resurrection life invades our community, I mean, I just see it everywhere. When we look at or think about resurrection, just throughout the last 2,000 years, there has been so many renderings of what that day might have been like. What was that morning like? It was the most famous morning in human history, I think. Perhaps the only other most famous could be, and then there was light, but this is even more famous, actually. If it's true, it's even more important. And so, one way I like to think about it, like what was actually happening? Like, so many people have hypothesized what it might have been like. Like, I like to think about it like, if we were there with our smartphones taking a video, what would the video have been like? Ever thought about it that way? Like, what would have been videos all over the internet? Did you see what happened? And there was angels there, and the stone was rolled away, there was an earthquake. I mean, all this stuff. And so I was thinking about that all week, and Ryan sent me this really funny, just super short video. So I'm gonna play it twice because it's so short, but you really got to listen close. But I think it's super funny. Like, just imagine what that moment would have been like. Here's just a little animated rendering. Here we go.
Hey! What?
Okay, play it one more time. It's just so funny. These are the Roman soldiers.
Hey! What?
Okay, so he said that made my week, man. That was so fun. I was like, yeah. I mean, that song's everywhere, right? That song's like Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, it's everywhere. Okay, so probably not exactly like that. But, was Jesus messing with the soldiers? Just like, what was that? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. So, now, on a more serious note, like I said, this morning literally changed the world. And it changed you have to sort of acquiesce to that point, whether or not you believe the resurrection actually happened. Regardless, it totally changed the world. The world is not the same, and not just the Western world. The whole world is different because of this morning. And so it's not a surprise that there have been so many things said about this morning and what actually happened and what was it like. And actually today we'll look at all 4 of the gospel accounts and see how they talk about this story. And what's interesting is they don't say exactly the same thing, and we'll look at that and say, well, why is that? Because there's so much to say about the most important morning in the world. But I want to start with, because what I don't know is if I did this inductively and brought this big aha, this is what Christians believe happened, you might, by the time I got there, be lost. And so I just want to do it deductively and say it up front, just to make sure I've clearly communicated what Christians believe about what happened on that morning, okay? Okay, so Christians believe that Jesus Christ bodily rose from the dead. And C.S. Lewis puts it quite well. So I want to read what he says about this in his book, Miracles. Lewis says this: the resurrection was not regarded simply or chiefly as evidence for the immortality of the soul. It is, of course, often so regarded today. He's, writing decades ago. But that's not Christian theology, that it just purports the immortality of the soul. I have heard a man maintain that the importance of the resurrection is that it proves survival. Such a view cannot at any point be reconciled with the language of the New Testament, of the Bible. On such a view, Christ would simply have done what all men do when they die. The only novelty would have been that in his case, we were allowed to see it happen, or see it happening. But there is not in Scripture the faintest suggestion that the resurrection was new evidence for something that had in fact been always happening. The New Testament writers speak as if Christ's achievement in rising from the dead was the first event of its kind in the whole history of the universe. He is the first fruits, the pioneer of life. He has forced open a door that has been locked since the death of the first man. I love that idea. He has knocked open a door, forced it open, a door that's been locked since Adam and Eve sinned in the garden and the door was shut behind them. He has met, fought, and beaten the king of death. Everything is different because he has done so. This is the beginning of the new creation. A new chapter in cosmic history has opened. That's what Christians believe about the resurrection. So whatever I say next, I didn't want you to miss that. Because what we're going to look at is some of the other characters, but that's the importance of the resurrection. A door has been knocked open that has been shut since human beings first sinned against a holy and perfect God. That door is now open again. because of the resurrection. Without the resurrection, without this morning, that would not be the case. We would be locked out of relationship and the presence of God in the way that God desires it. It's huge, okay? So that's what Christian theology, good theology at least, teaches about the resurrection. Now, what have other people said? Well, some, even in the days and weeks that followed, some have said, and the Gospels actually tell us, we'll read that today, tell us that people were crafting outright lies. They were sowing seeds of deception, and we'll read that today. The Gospel writers tell us that it was the Jewish authorities, the same ones who had been leading the charge to arrest and crucified Jesus, the same ones outright created a lie because they could not produce the body of Jesus when news or rumor of his resurrection started circulating. And so they paid off the guards, the ones you saw singing here, those same guys. They paid them off. So what we have is a historical record that there was actually a active deception campaign going on against the missing body of Jesus. So that's one lie, is that the body was stolen. Now, others heard the rumors and they came up with plausibility guesses. These are educated people, curious people who've heard about this resurrection and wondering, how could it be possible? Perhaps trauma-induced hallucinations. Perhaps it was just the ghost of Jesus visiting his disciples. Maybe Jesus didn't actually die on the cross. It just seemed as if he had died. He was buried sort of half dead, unconscious, in a coma, something like that, and then resuscitated when in the tomb. Like, we know that these rumors were going around, or these possible renderings of the events of this morning. How do we explain that the tomb is empty? We know that because often what the gospel writers are doing is giving you details that help counter against those alternate narratives. We'll see that today. Jesus was already wrapped in linen cloths, including a wrap around his face. A lot of medical professionals in the room, not a great idea for someone in a coma to wrap their face several times with a thick linen cloth that has been dipped in nard. Am I right? I mean, I'm no medical professional myself. I am married to one. So I don't think you want to close so that's part of why they give us those details. And what we'll see, and I'm going to hand you out something here in a second, the 4 gospel accounts. What you'll see is that they're picking their details about what to share, not because they're trying to give you an exhaustive account of what happened, but in part because they know there's other alternative narratives or renderings of that morning. And they want to give you some details that they were privy to because they were friends with the guys, remember Nico and Joe, who wrapped up the face and wrapped up the body? Great sermon last week, Nico and Joe. If you don't know about Nico and Joe, we were talking about Pete and Johnny today. Also, Mary M. This will be a fun day. We got Nico. We got so many fun characters. And they want you to have this information too. Because guess what? In 2,000 years, there haven't really been any better hypothetical renderings of the morning besides what came out in the weeks and months that followed. That's interesting. No one's really come up with a better alternative story to why the tomb is empty, including no one ever found a body. And so the same stories, the same hypotheticals are put out there today as they were 2,000 years ago. And so the gospel writers, knowing this, are giving us accounts of the resurrection, not because it was the first time the people they were writing to had heard of the resurrection, but because they thought these were the things that they needed to help them continue to move forward in faith. So the same is true for us. What is it in John's account of the resurrection that we need to know today? That's how I want you to be thinking about it. What does God want to be revealing to me today in the details John chooses to give us? Because he doesn't give us all the same details as Matthew, Mark, or Luke. What do I need to know? Why did God bring me here this morning? What does he want to teach me and reveal to me about himself? Maybe there's something unique that John, prompted by the Spirit of God, gave us, knowing that you'd be listening to it this morning. I believe that's how God works. So I want you to be very personal this morning. What is it about these details I need to hear? Okay? So, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass out a handout. This is like a real classroom situation. So I need a couple of volunteers, maybe some front row guys, to come up and just get these passing around. Let's go, Dolly. Okay? Right over here. Start on this side, and then pass them down. Like, look the person. You ever heard the phrase "pass the peace"? Look them in the eye and say, "Here you go," and say, "Nice to see you." If you didn't do that in the 4-minute conversation, so we're passing these out, and one of the things you're going to notice when you, and I'm sorry for the small print. I wanted to get it all on one page. So, feel free to get your phone out and use your light if you need that to be able to read. But I wanted you to be able to see it, to have it in your hands, and to look at them all next to each other. Because this is actually how I prepare for a sermon. I look at them all together and I say, what's the same? What's different? And what you'll see is, and I'm not the first one to bring this up, you'll hear this, you're like, they're not the same accounts. There's all sorts of contradictions in there. Is that true? So one of the reasons I want to show you what could be contradictions, but then show you how maybe there is a way to harmonize or even understand why the gospel writers talked slightly differently about the details. Part of the reason I wanted to do that with you is because there's nothing to hide. But honestly, this is one of the challenges that we all face when we read the Bible. We look at it and it's like there's an apparent contradiction. And the question is, how do you work through that and understand that in order that you don't lose the joy of what it is? Others will challenge the Bible and say, oh, how could God have written such a book that it's saying one thing here and one thing there? You want to be able to answer that. You want to be able to answer that first and foremost for yourself so that you don't stop reading what God has written or start saying, oh, maybe God had nothing to do with it. But also you want to be able to give an account to them of, oh, no, I think you're misunderstanding what the Bible is. It's not like any other book that's been written. Okay, so we'll do that. I also wanted to do this because I wanted to show you that the writers of Scripture actually don't seem to be concerned about making it nice and easy for you to believe. Isn't that interesting? In fact, it's almost like they take their orders from someone higher than you. So they're not concerned to mesh it all together just so it's easy for you to believe. Because it would have been very easy. John's writing 2 decades after the other gospel writers. He could have very purposefully matched what they'd written just so that you'd believe and not struggle with this idea of why are they picking out different details. But he doesn't. Why would he do that? Why is he trying to make it so hard for us? And everyone's been through the 14 principles, says, Dave, it's not about you. It's not about me. God's doing something else. And that's why you have to ask, why did he write this particular gospel? I think he's trying to tell me something. Not because it's about me, but because he didn't care that the argument would be made that these things don't line up perfectly and neatly. So that's another reason I wanted to go through this little exercise with you. But then I'm going to show you that, in fact, there are ways, at second glance, to synthesize and harmonize these accounts. They're not actually incongruent They can work together. You just have to use your creativity, which God also gave you, luckily. Some of you. Now, some more than others. So when we read, say, John's account, because he hasn't prioritized sort of easy believism or parroting what the other Gospels write, but instead asking God and God inspiring him writes and gives us very new details and different details. When we read his account, it should become clear to us that the way he is saying it and the details that he is choosing to focus on must be of even greater importance than we first imagined. If he's willing, and I would say God is willing to take all this skepticism on himself or on his word, then the thing that he prompts John to say must be even more important than we thought at first, right? Because God can see down the corridor of history, knowing that this would trouble me, an overly educated, overly sophisticated, modern person like me, who will try to fit them all together. He knows that's going to happen, and yet he says, nope, this is still the right way to write this account. So I want you to think about all of that. And I hope then, therefore, what John is going to tell us, particularly about Mary Magdalene, Mary of Magdala, that Mary. Remember how there's so many Marys? And that's also something, if you were trying to make up a story, you'd pick different names. I love that about the Bible. There's so many Marys. You're going to see them. They're all over this, and you're like, which Mary are we talking about? That's not the first concern. The first concern is to tell you what you need to know about this because it means something for you, I think, particularly in the story of Mary here this morning, okay? So having said that, let's begin charitably before we read through these 4 accounts and look at the things in this story that we know for certain they have in common. I want you to notice these things. The first thing you'll notice when we read these is that every account begins on the first day of the week when the Sabbath had ended. So that would have been Sunday. So that's why Christians historically worship on Sunday, because new life started on Sunday. A new chapter in cosmic history started on Sunday, and so that's why Christians began to gather on Sundays. Okay? So that's in all 4 accounts. Also, in all 4 accounts, women arrive first at the tomb. Well, that's important detail. Again, if you were making something up, you would have thought one of them would have snuck a dude in there. Because back in the day, a woman's testimony in a court of law was not even admissible. But all 4 of them, in their own way, it's women who show up first. Don't miss that. Don't miss that. This is the revolution. This is where it began. A new chapter in which the testimony and witness of women became equal to the testimony and witness of men. Don't miss it. It happened here. The world would not in any way resemble what it does now if this morning hadn't happened. Don't forget where it came from. It was not a part of the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Hebrew Empire. It was nowhere until this morning, people. Don't forget that. Okay. Also, in every account, angels are present and involved. Sometimes we only see 1, sometimes we'll see 2. But there's always angels present. Spiritual beings created by God to do and help God in his work of revelation as messengers of God. They're there in all 4 accounts. And then what we'll see in all 4 accounts, and this, again, we've become so sort of numb to this detail, but like all 4 of them, the tomb is definitely empty. And the burial clothes are definitely still in there. And don't miss that. That's like huge. That's huge. You know, they didn't leave like a separate set of clothes, just in case somebody rose from the dead. So you got to think about that, okay? But the tomb is there, the burial clothes are there, and so if somebody were to rob, that was the only thing of value in the tomb. Why are they still there? Really important. We're not going to go into that too much, but we've got the handout. So you've got your handout in front of you, okay? Time to go to class. Here we go. I need my glasses because this type is so... Who made this? So small, I can't even read it. Okay, that's me. I made that. All right. So I want you to notice, just the first thing I want you to notice when you look at that is Mark. Most scholars believe, even though Matthew's first in the canon of most Bibles, most scholars believe Mark wrote his gospel first. Notice how much shorter his is than the others. Now, each time you see a little black highlight here, that's something that is unique only to that gospel writer. So, in Matt's gospel, see how I call him Matt? Nico, Joe, Matt, Mark. I don't know what you call Lukey boy, Johnny boy, Johnny Q. Okay, anyhow, I just love what Ryan said last week because I feel that way. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should have people call me Pastor David. It sounds so official. But then I'm like, Nico and Joe, they got no problem with it. Okay, so Pastor Dave. Okay, so these are unique things. They're not in any of the other Gospels. So what you can kind of see just by looking at it is each Gospel writer is adding something, some detail, some story to create an even fuller picture of that morning and how profound it was. So in one sense, okay, having 4 accounts helps us see a broader, fuller picture of what that day was like. I'm so glad we have all 4. In our minds, we tend to kind of shrink them down, but then when we pull them out, we say, well, why don't they match up? And the answer is because they're not trying to match up. They're trying to tell you more information that you didn't have before. Okay. So, seeing those unique insertions is then pivotal to then trying to understand, well, why did the gospel writer choose, they all had all the details, I'm sure of it, why did they choose this particular story or part of the story to insert, or why did they say it that way? That will help us understand the theological message that they're trying to get out, because they're not just trying to give you facts. They're trying to give you a theological perspective on what the resurrection meant. They're trying to help you to show you something while also helping you believe that these other rumors about it are not true. They couldn't be true. Why would a robber steal a naked body and not take the only thing of value? That's why they include the burial clothes, okay? So let's read them together. And again, I don't want to just whitewash it and say, oh, see, they're all the same. I want you to see the differences because I want you to be honest with the text and not be scared of honesty. Okay, here we go. Ready? Mark's gospel says this, probably the first written. It says this: when the Sabbath day was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint him. That's Jesus' dead corpse. So very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb at sunrise. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb for us?" And looking up, they noticed that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And when they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side. They were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he told them. Yeah, easy for you to say. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they put him. Now, go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you. So they went out and ran from the tomb because trembling and astonishment overwhelmed them, and they said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. Now, start thinking. Circle they. They said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. Okay, who's the they? And I'm just going to give you some little notes to start thinking about, because I got them on mine. Was Mary Magdalene part of the they? It's going to be very important, because John is going to become hyper-focused on Mary from Magdala. That's where probably she was from. That's why I call her Mary Magdalene. Okay. Was she part of the they that were so afraid they didn't say anything? It's going to be one of the hard things to harmonize. Okay, here we go. Matt's gospel says it this way. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to view the tomb. Okay, so Matthew just mentions Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, and we're not sure which of the many Marys that could possibly be. Matthew doesn't seem to care to tell us. Thanks, Matthew. Don't you know we're modern people who love detail and footnotes? Hyperlinks? No, he says it doesn't really matter. The other Mary went to the tomb, and there was a violent earthquake because an angel of the Lord had descended from heaven and approached the tomb, and he rolled the stone and was sitting on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards, here we have the guards, so Mark didn't tell us about the guards, but we've seen the YouTube. Clearly the guards were there, rocking and rolling. The guard that had been sent, they were shaken by fear of him, of the angel, and they became like dead men. They probably fainted. So the angel then told the women, "Don't be afraid, because I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you." So departing quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, they ran to tell the disciples the news. Just then, Jesus met them, and circle them, who's the them, and said, "Greetings." They came up, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus told them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there." Okay? And now he inserts this other unique story about the soldiers being bribed. So then Matt continues, and he says, "As they were on their way, some of the guards came into the city, reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. After the priests had assembled with the elders and agreed on a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money and told them, 'Say this, that his disciples came during the night, stole his body while we were sleeping. And if this reaches the governor's ear, we will deal with him and keep you out of trouble.' They took the money and did as they were instructed, and this story has spread amongst the Jewish people to this day." So you see that? Now, there's holes you could poke in that story. Like, if you fell asleep on guard, the punishment for that in the Roman army was death, not just a slap on the wrist. So I don't know if they'd trade like money for death. That seems like a bad idea. Maybe they're just worried about their 401k, passing it on. I don't know. Anyhow, that's what happened, according to Matthew. Now let's look at Luke's gospel. He adds even more detail. "But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking spices they had prepared." Who's they? We'll find out later. He doesn't say it up front. "And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them," who is the them? We don't know. We still don't know. It's not clear yet who the them there is. "But the angel said, 'Why do you seek the living amongst the dead?'" That's very similar to what Mark and Matthew said. "Why do you seek amongst the dead? He is not here, but he has risen." Okay, so all three accounts, The angel says, he's not here, he has risen. Okay, so there's some important information that they're given. That's a revelation. That whoever the them is, the they is, have. Okay, remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified on the third day, and then on the third day rise. Remember, he predicted this, the angel says. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Okay, so they, who's the they, told this to all 11. Make note of that. It's going to help us maybe understand how to piece this together. So they report that back to the 11. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping, he looked in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. And then Luke has this unique insertion of Jesus appearing to other disciples, not a part of the 11, on the road to Emmaus. That very day, two of them, and this is a different them, this is two male disciples, were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking to each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. There seems to be almost a spiritual element here that Jesus didn't want them yet to recognize him and was able to keep them from doing that in the spiritual sense. And Jesus said to them, What's this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk? And they stood still, looking sad. They stood still, looking sad. Underline that. Do they believe yet? No, they don't know. Their eyes have been kept from seeing him. They stood still, and they were sad. Make a note. They stood still. They were looking very sad. As you might imagine, your leader, your teacher has just been crucified. He's dead. Well, that's why we're walking 7 miles back home. Okay? It's over. Then, this is verse 18. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days during this Passover festival? Are you the only one that hasn't heard? Has your head been in the sand? Everyone's talking about it. And Jesus said to them, What things? I love that. See, I think Jesus might have sung along from the tomb. He likes messing with people. What things? And they said to him, Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. But he's obviously not. We had hoped, but he was not. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things have happened. I mean, people have been talking about it for days now. How did you not hear about this? It's the third day. It's Sunday. I mean, he was crucified back on Friday. How did you not hear about this? You the only one? And then they go on to say, Moreover, some of the women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those were with us and went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. But they did not see him. They did not see Jesus' body. Okay, I cut it off there because then Jesus eats with them and then he's like, hey. And they're like, wow. It's awesome. So these guys had seen all the deeds, the miracles Jesus had done. They believed him to be the Messiah, the one God would send to redeem Israel. They were all in. Then Jesus dies, and then they're out. It's over. It's done. And even after hearing the report of the empty tomb, guess what? They don't believe that he's risen from the dead. They believe some other rendering of the events. Somehow his body's missing, but yeah, there was an angel there, but who knows if that was true or not. So we're out. We're walking back to Emmaus. I mean, how crazy is that? We're not even going to stick around to see what happens next. I mean, it's already been like 3 days. Did you hear that? Do you hear their unbelief? And so Jesus reveals himself to these two in a very special way. And Luke doesn't, he's like, nobody's written this down yet. That's crazy that he did this for these guys. This is going to become very important as we look at John's rendering, okay? Because Jesus did this for these guys. Might he do it for others? If need be? Here we go. You ready for John's account? Okay. See the commonality, see the difference. Here we go. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark. Okay, where's all the others? We don't know. John just wants to hyper-focus on Mary here. We're not sure yet why. It was still dark. Every other one said it was just dawning, the sun. Still dark. Maybe that's important. I don't know. Let's see. And saw, circle saw, that will become important in about 5 minutes or so. Saw, and that the stone, she saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. What'd she do next? She waits for the angel to come, and the angel tells her that Jesus isn't here because why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? Okay, right? Uh-oh. Verse 2 says, so she ran. She sees the empty tomb and she just bolts. That's what John says happened. She bolts away from the tomb, and she ran and went to the 11 disciples. Right? Wait, nope. Sorry, typo. She went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. We've taught this before. When John references the disciple whom Jesus loved, who's he talking about? Himself. So she goes, not to all of the disciples, but to Simon Peter and John, and tells them, what does she say? She says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him. She's not talking about angels. She's talking about either the Jewish officials or the Romans or Robert. Like, she doesn't know, but some human being took the body. She's convinced of it, enough to run full speed and tell Peter and John. So, this is where it starts to get really funny. So Peter went out with the other disciple. Again, John doesn't like to talk about himself because he's very humble. Very humble. This is very important to see how humble John is. I'm not even going to use my name. It's the one that Jesus loved. But I won't use my name. And then he says this. So we both set out. We were running together, verse 4, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. I mean, why you got to put that detail in? You'll find out it doesn't advance the story at all. Because he literally waits at the edge of the tomb until Peter gets there, then Peter goes in first. But it's important to know. The world needs to know. Seattleites 2,000 years later need to know John's faster than Peter. I mean, Peter's a little bit older. He's been through a little bit more life. John gets there first. So I'm glad we know that. What's funny is this isn't the last time this detail will be mentioned. So let's read on. Verse 5. And stooping to look in, he, that is John, saw the linen clothes lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter, could have been, maybe minutes later. He could have said that like 5 or 6 minutes later. Shows up. And Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen clothes lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. And this is important because that was the most expensive piece of linen, the face cloth. You can imagine if you put the best cloth around the face, it's a sign of honor and respect. But that has not only is still there, not taken by robbers, but it's actually folded up. Who would take the time to fold? This doesn't sound like Romans. If you know the Romans, they're a bit disorganized, disheveled. No hospital corners on their beds. These guys slept on the ground. Okay. So that's interesting. John wants us to know. Nobody's kind of mentioned that the face cloth was sort of folded up. He's like, I think people need to know that. That's super interesting detail. I think it's important, John says. So I'm going to put it in there. So he sees them. He sees the linen cloths. And then it says, and then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, that's John. Remember the one that's faster? Then he also went into the tomb, and he saw and believed. Remember, Mary saw and ran to tell them somebody had stolen the body. He saw and believed. Okay, so what did he believe? Verse 9, for as yet they did not understand the Scripture. What he's saying is, until that moment, they hadn't understood the Scripture. Even though Jesus had been predicting this and telling them, until that moment, they didn't know, oh my gosh, he actually does have to rise from the dead. And it hits him like a lightning bolt in this moment. Oh my gosh, he was telling the actual truth. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He wasn't speaking spiritual language. He told us this. It's actually true, and the Scriptures have predicted it. He saw and believed. And so what does he do, right? Because he believed that Jesus has risen. And so you would think if you believe, the thing you should do is hang around, see if you can find him. A little hide and seek. Because he believed. Does he do that? I think this is so fascinating, this detail. He believes, they believe, and it says, then the disciples went back to their homes. What? Go find him. Whatever that belief was, that Jesus had been sort of systematically revealing and growing over time and now comes into its fullness, whatever that trust was, I believe these guys are like, it's never worked for us to try to force Jesus' hand, to force God's hand, to make him do the next thing that we want him to do. So we'll go back to our home and we'll wait. That kind of faith, I think, is terrific. I don't know what you're doing, God. I believe that you've risen, but I'm not going to force your hand. Who am I? I'll just go home and I'll wait. I know you'll find me if you want to. Don't miss that faith. I didn't see that. I've heard this story so many times. I didn't see it till this week about what kind of faith that takes to just wait. Back home till Jesus makes his next move. It's incredible faith. Now, he just sort of stops there, and then he turns his gaze, as the author, John, back to this Mary of Magdala. Mary Magdalene. She's going to get more shine in this moment than any woman that's ever got shine in the history of the world. Right here. And then I'm going to mess with you a second. Okay. Because I think I misunderstood what's going on here. Why does John now turn back from these disciples who show this great faith? One's pretty fast, one's, pretty average runner. But they have great faith and to wait on the Lord. And now he turns his gaze to this Mary who didn't believe when she saw the empty tomb. And John's like, I want to tell you this story because I think this story tells us something about God that we couldn't see through the other stories, the other resurrection accounts that have been already told. I want you to know this one. You need to see this. This is incredible, John's saying. You need to see what happened next. So then he sort of jumps back, and it seems like some time has passed, because he says, but Mary stood still. Remember I said circle stood still? Who else stood still? The two disciples on the road to Emmaus with Jesus standing next to them, who are devastated, in despair, and sad because it's over. So she stood still, weeping in sadness outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped in to look into the tomb to look again. And she saw at that moment two angels in white sitting there, the body of Jesus, where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she said to them, "Have they taken away my Lord? They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." I mean, she's still convinced as ever. He's dead. And I don't get to say goodbye like I came to do. Having said this, she turned around and then saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Now, supposing him to be the gardener, Mary said to Jesus, "Sir, if you have carried him away," maybe it was the gardener took him. But she has no idea. Maybe it's this gardener. I don't know why he did it, but maybe he took it. "If you've taken him away, just tell me where you've laid him, and then I will take him away and finish the burial process and honor my rabbi." Jesus then said to her, Mary, her personal name, Mary, like only Jesus could say it. And she turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me." So clearly she ran up to him and grabbed him, and he's like, "Get off." Okay? He's like, "It's not about you." Okay? I mean, I love you, but I got work to do. "I have not yet ascended to the Father, so go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to the Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And then Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord, and this is what he has said." Okay. You see how these could be troubling. They seem to be different accounts to some degree, right? And as I've been going, I've been trying to show you, maybe don't jump to conclusions. So, now, I don't know exactly how it went down. Nobody does. Nobody knows the timing of it. We know there was a lot of people coming and a lot of people going. It was chaotic. Remember that. There was no script for this. There was no okay, now you guys need to enter the scene first and then you need to leave together. This is chaotic. I mean, people are fearing for their lives. Their leader has just been killed. There's Roman guards. There's women in a garden at dawn and dusk. That's a dangerous place to be. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. So what I want to just read for you is a possible or potential harmony of these narratives of the resurrection of Christ. Not because I say I know this is how it happened, but it's possible this is how it happened. And that's all you need. So that you can focus then on the thing John's trying to tell you. Not trying to pick exactly how it goes together. So I want to tell you, because I needed it. It was helpful for me. So I'm giving it to you. So this is a potential rendering then of what happened based on all four of these accounts. Here we go. Ready? First, Jesus is buried, as several women watch, so they know where he's buried. Then the tomb is sealed, and a Roman guard is set out front to protect it. Then on Sunday, so that's Friday, and then on Sunday, at least 3 women, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, prepare spices to go to the tomb. Okay? There's at least 3 of them. An angel descends from heaven, rolls the stone away, so the grave is already open. There's some type of earthquake. The guards faint. The women arrive at the tomb, find it empty, and this. I didn't think about that until I was like, yeah. Then Mary Magdalene bolts. She didn't wait to see what happens next. She's gone. Boom. She leaves and runs, leaving the other women there for everything that happens next and what's revealed to them and they. Remember the them and they that are too scared to tell the disciples? She runs, tells Peter and John. The women still at the tomb see the 2 angels that tell them that Jesus is risen and instruct them to go tell the disciples to go to Galilee. See, Mary didn't hear that part of it because she bolted. The women leave to bring the good news to the disciples. The guards, having now roused themselves, report the empty tomb to the authorities, who bribe the guards to say that the body was stolen. Mary, the mother of James, and the other women, on their way to go find the disciples, they see Jesus, who says, "Greetings." But Mary Magdalene's not there because she has already run way ahead to go tell Peter and John. At some point, the women do finally come back and get over the fear that Mark talked about, and they do tell the other disciples. Meanwhile, Peter and John run to the tomb. They see the empty tomb. They find the grave clothes. And then they head back to the house. Mary Magdalene returns to the tomb. She now sees the angels that then tell her the other things that they were hoping to tell her the first time, but she bolted. And then she sees Jesus. Then we find out from other accounts that later that same day, Jesus appears to Peter. Still the same day, Jesus appears to the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. Then that evening, those disciples report back to the 11 disciples in Jerusalem. Then those 11 disciples get to see Jesus, but Thomas is not there. Why weren't you at the meeting, Thomas? He's on Sedaris time. He was probably 15 minutes late. That's too late. You may miss it. He misses it. And then Jesus appears again to all the disciples, including Thomas. And then Jesus also appears to 7 disciples at the Sea of Galilee, just like he promised that he would. And then Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, there were over 500 disciples who saw Jesus up in Galilee. And Paul says, most of them are still alive. You can go ask them about it. Jesus will appear then to his half-brother, James. Jesus will commission the disciples. Matthew 28, the Great Commission. Jesus, in the next 40 days, will also teach Scripture and about the promised sending of the Spirit. And then Jesus ascends to heaven, translates to heaven. So I wanted to share that with you, not because I know that's exactly how it happened, but that actually accounts for all of the detail we have. And then we can transition from, why is it so different, to why did John highlight Mary of Magdala the way he did? I mean, she's clearly important, right? Because all the 4 accounts talk about her specifically. She's the only one of the women that are talked about. So clearly, she was talking about the resurrection in a way that maybe not all of them were talking about it. She had a unique experience. So maybe that's why all 4 of them mention her. Only John goes into the detail. And I love that. This is a historical event. This actually happened in some way, and we just have little angles on it to try to see how it all fits together. But John says, that's not what I'm most focused on. I want you to see what happens for Mary. That's what I want you to see. She had a unique experience, and she was the first to see and interact with the resurrected Jesus. She was the first. God chose to reveal himself to Mary of Magdala, who at one point he had to cast out 7 demons before she could come and follow him. The last person you'd pick. Jesus picked her. But then the question is, why was she chosen for this great honor? Why was she chosen for this great honor? Now, This is the thing that really rattled me this week, because I've heard so many sermons on this exact passage saying the reason God chose Mary of Magdala is because of her great and admirable faith. Have you heard it? I literally went back and saw if my favorite pastor from Dallas when I lived there, if he said it this way. And guess what? He said exactly that. Okay, now she's great, and she's got great faith. The question is, when did that faith begin? That's the question. I'd never seen it before this week. And it's going to become so important. This pastor of mine, who I respect so much, he was my pastor when my sister died, so he means so much to me. But he took the word stood, that she stood firm, and he just jammed on that for a long time. He said, you know, that verb's in the pluperfect. You know what the pluperfect is? It just means it's really important if somebody uses the pluperfect verb tense. And I would agree with him. But I don't think it's because of her great faith. Now, standing firm is definitely a part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. But why was Mary standing firm in this moment? Look at the text. Why was she standing firm? It's not because she believes he's risen from the dead. It's because she's hopeless. She's despairing. She's so sad. And so she stands firm. She can't move. She's paralyzed by her lack of faith. Now, for sure, as time went on, Mary of Magdala became known as a woman of great faith. Even up to this moment, she had great faith to follow Jesus through everything that she'd been to. But in this moment, God didn't choose to reveal to her first the resurrection of Jesus because she had great faith. It's because she had no faith. What if Jesus gives Mary Magdalene this great honor because of her weakness, not because of her strength? How would that change the way we interacted with God? What if God revealed this to her because she was frozen in despair? Because she was vulnerable. I mean, remember, she's the one who clearly had been subject to and vulnerable to spiritual attack her whole life. She had 7 demons. She was extremely vulnerable. What if that's why Jesus decides to reveal himself to her? I mean, she's the one who bolted before getting to hear what the angel said, potentially. She's the one that just couldn't even imagine the resurrection. Maybe she was most prone to miss out on it. And Jesus, out of great compassion and love for her, said, I better tell Mary first. She's most likely to walk away. How would that change the way you read this passage? How would that change the way you understand how God works in the world? Remember, I told you to circle saw in verse 1 of John's account. Saw. And then I said circle saw again. So both Mary and John and Peter saw. One believed, one didn't. I think John's trying to show you something. Don't misunderstand. I mean, you guys know about Mary. You've heard about Mary. She's in all the accounts. She is a great woman of faith. It wasn't always like that. Don't miss out. Don't think you have to be this great pillar of faith in order to be blessed by the revelation of God. It's the other way around. God chooses to reveal in exactly the way that you need it based upon your faith. So some of you have this incredible gift of faith and you don't need much evidence. Some of you need a supernatural expression of God's revelation because you are of little faith. It's actually the other way around. What if that's true? How would that change the way you interacted? Now you say, Dave, that's stretching it. Can you be sure John is highlighting that? John's going to tell two more stories about the resurrection. He's going to say Jesus appeared to a meeting of the 10 because there was one missing. His name was Thomas. He missed out. And Jesus came back and did exactly what Thomas needed because he was full of doubt. Yeah, you missed the meeting, you were late, you slept in, I don't know what. I'll come back and give you a special revelation, Thomas, because I know you struggle with doubt. Here's my hands, here's my feet. I'm right here. Touch me, I'm real. What a special gift he gave to Thomas. Not because Thomas was full of faith, right? How do we know Thomas? Doubting Thomas, right? Like Thomas is known for, he's the guy he's slow to believe. And Jesus gave Thomas a special viewing party too. You think John may be showing a pattern here? God shows up to different people in different ways based on what they need because he loves them personally. I think that's actually why John puts this in. He did it for Mary, he did it for Thomas, and he'll do it for you. You do not have to have great faith to believe. Belief rides on the revelation of God, not the other way around. I thought that to be so freeing when I realized that this week. I said to myself, that's something we need to make sure everyone hears. So did John. John wants you to know, because this is the very common lie that is whispered into the ears of all God's children. It goes like this. The lie goes something like this. If you just had enough faith, then God would reveal himself to you also. I can tell you how many times I've heard that lie. Oh, God, I must not have enough faith. If you just had enough faith, if you could just muster it up, if you could just work harder to have more faith, then God would show himself to you. John says, no, guys. That's not how it works. Mary, who saw the empty tomb, potentially saw an angel, she still couldn't believe until God showed up in this very special way for her. And then faith birthed in her life. And she gave her life to Jesus Christ. And we know she must have just been an amazing witness to God. God's revelation is the reason for your faith. Your faith is not the reason for God's revelation. That's so important. In this moment, God gives Mary the most beautiful of all gifts, the gift of himself. If she needed a certain other gift to receive this gift, she might have missed out on it. Good news. You don't need any other gift to receive the gift of God giving himself to you. Burn whatever in your mind says, I need this thing or this much faith or that kind of background or this much knowledge. Burn it all. You need nothing. He knows exactly what you need, and he'll give you the revelation that matches perfectly with what you need. You just have to have ears to listen, and he'll say your name, Mary, Nico, Joe, Matthew, Thomas, John, Peter. He'll say your name exactly how you need him to say it for your eyes to be opened and realize he really is alive. Let's pray.